Good afternoon, everybody. I can see people just starting to arrive, hopefully from their thought nugget sessions, which I hope have been insightful for everybody. Just watching those numbers go up. Just pop in the chat, just so we know that you're out there, where you're logging in from today and which education institute you're representing. It'd be really nice to see that in the chat. And we'll just give people just a few seconds to log on before we start our next session in terms of the panel discussion. Excellent. Hello, Angela. Good to see you. Hi, Andrea. I've started doing a bad thing here of personally welcoming people, but good to see people logging on. Pop it down in the chat. There must have been one of the thought nuggets that was just overrunning because I can see people now rapidly joining. Morning, Cowan. Morning, Nick. Good to see everybody. Again, if you're just joining, we'll just give people a few moments to come over from the Thought Nugget sessions. Pop in the chat, say hello to us. Wow, morning, Zul from Malaysia. Wow. Welcome to those logging on from our Malaysian partnership. Good to see you joining the sessions. Hopefully we'll give you some insights to take away. Okay, just give a couple of seconds while I can see people are still joining, then we'll kick start. If you are doing the ECC competition, looking out for the symbols, whilst our holding slides up, now might be a good time just to double check that you've got your symbol marked off on your card as part of the ECC prize. Hopefully it's quite obvious what might be the animal icon on the holding card that maybe shouldn't be there. Very good, Nicholas. Good to see comedy is alive. Okay, I can see we've still got a few people joining, but I'm going to kickstart the session now. So good afternoon and welcome everybody to the ECC Conference 2023 and our panel discussion for the day. I'm Ian Hodson, I'm a board member at ECC, and today on our panel we're going to be exploring with our experts the relationship between employees and employers and that transition that we've touched on throughout the conference towards heading for fulfillment, but how we can deliver a great customer experience in the battle to ultimately motivate, engage and retain our members of staff. So just for a little bit of housekeeping, the session's due to run through to 12:50. We'll leave time for questions at the end, so please make sure that you post them on the Q&A tab, and I'll make sure I come to them at the end of the session, or if there's something throughout, I'll come to it. And without further ado, let me go on and introduce our great panel of experts that we've assembled for you today to guide us through their thoughts on this topic and hopefully give you some insights to take away. So I'll just ask our panel members to come on to camera now, and I will introduce them. So first of all, Jackie Buttery. So Jackie Buttery is the head of business benefits and reward at Travers Smith, and Jackie oversees all aspects of reward, including pay, pensions, benefits, and well-being. Jackie started her career in graduate recruitment, progressed into reward specialism, and has been there for over 20 years, particularly working in the legal sector, including time at Herbert Smith Freehills and Eversheds, who do a lot of work with the sector. Jackie's built up a reputation of creating benefit programs built on health, well-being support, communication, and great engagement initiatives, and also has been recognised for this in the profession. So good morning, Jackie. Next, Domi Shaminsky. So Domi is the global pay and reward manager at Stella McCartney in the fashion industry and a member of the Reward 300. Dom is an experienced profession on all aspects of global benefits, reward management and reward strategy, and has built a reputation on building innovative ways to achieve employee engagement and really pushing the boundaries. And finally on our panel, Chris Coyne. Chris is head of performance and reward at AWE, who are a very large defence contractor working in the science, engineering and manufacturing sector. Chris has worked in reward for nearly 24 years across education, property and IT, and really focuses on joining up those traditional compensation and benefits elements that we're very used to in a true total reward proposition. So welcome and thank you to all three of our panel members, and let's get the debate and the discussion kick-started. So Jackie, I'm going to kick off with you, but we've seen a lot of change and evolution in our workplaces, and I think the pandemic's been very much an accelerator for changing relationships and expectations between employer and employee. Just give us some insights, Jackie, in terms of what you've seen in your organisation that you've changed as a result of where we are now, and then what's been the drivers for those changes.
I think post the pandemic, there's a much greater level of expectation, I think, from employees around the support that we're able to offer. And I think there's a lot more openness too, particularly amongst our graduates. So we're seeing graduates arrive and being very transparent about mental health challenges they may have, for example, really wanting to engage with us as the employer to think about the support needs they have, enabling them to thrive in the workplace. So, we've evidently wanted to embrace that, but it's felt like quite a shift when I think back to the pandemic. The other major shift, of course, has been how we transact with employees in respect of where they work and how they work. So in a legal sector context, many firms see their people work quite agilely now, and historically the legal sector wasn't good at that. So to really bring engagement to the fore, really, by being able to offer those different working patterns has been really a positive outcome of the pandemic.
And do you think, Jackie, that opaqueness and that transparency of people being a lot more willing to talk about, what they would like, how they need to be supported, do you see that as being accelerated by the pandemic, that's kind of what it did? It made us be a bit more open about how we're feeling, what we needed?
Absolutely. I think there's still some distance to travel. So I think females still are sharers more than males in respect of their health challenges, for example. But the younger males in particular, they've come out of the university structures into work, and there's much more open communication around challenges they may have. We're seeing a lot more engagement across the wellbeing space, full stop, which is fantastic. We just need to deliver the services to support people now, because their expectations have risen as a result.
Yeah, not the easy bit. Domi, talk to us about Stella McCartney. Talk to us about the fashion industry. What's changed for you, Domi, in terms of where you find yourself now and those employee expectations?
I think in terms of, it's quite similar to what Jackie mentioned about well-being and flexibility. I think for me specifically is how we communicate what we already kind of offer, because I feel like employees definitely want to understand the kind of whole package rather than, and they do really ask questions now, and whether that's for the information of making sure that they are staying in the right place, or if they want to, if we can't retain them, they still want to understand the full value of their total reward. So I think communication is well-being. Communication is a big one, but well-being is probably just on the top priority.
Yeah, and Domi, we're in the middle of an economic sort of crisis as well on the back of the pandemic. Has that sort of changed where you find the questions and the focus come in from employees, that a lot more support or that opaqueness again is around maybe some of those financial challenges, and how can the employer help?
Yes, 100%. And I think, with the as part of the well-being and with kind of what we offer, even in terms of private medical, people are very much kind of asking a lot of questions around, how that works just for them financially, but also, it's kind of like a different tunnel for them to use things rather than, going to NHS, which is currently super busy, I guess, with all the backlog. So yes, 100%. But I think from my side, I also like to focus on kind of return on investment in terms of just for the business, so we can offer more. But how do you offer more without, having to ask for extra budget every quarter or so?
And it's interesting, Domi, isn't it? Because sometimes the best benefits can often be the free benefits, and that return on investment. We often look at things like group income protection, and it gives often, it impacts quite a small number of people for the actual true cost of the benefit. So I think that impact is a really important word. Chris, just in terms of where you find yourself and where your focuses are in your workplace now and what's driving your agenda.
Yes, of course, and I guess unsurprisingly, it's probably a build on what Dommy and Jackie have said, because I think we're all in a very similar space here, but maybe some slightly different observations that people might find interesting. I think definitely the hybrid flexible working, that's a common theme wherever you go, wherever you talk to colleagues nowadays. But I think interestingly, we're seeing a growing return to the workplace where I work. Voluntarily, it's not as part of an initiative, and I think that possibly reflects, building on sort of pandemic experiences, the value that people are perhaps belatedly realizing now there is in person-to-person collaboration. So I think that's an interesting spin on perhaps some of the what you read in the media about what people are seeing, but obviously that is cultural, local to your cultures, local to your organization. I think more broadly, people have talked about expectations growing. I'd go back one step further. I think the reason for that, and it may be a good thing and a bad thing, in fact it is probably both, is that during the pandemic we had a huge culture of dependency. We all looked to the state to solve our problems, keep us safe, tell us what to do, where to be. And that has really, in my experience, that's really translated into the workplace, whereas the employer has now become the state. What are you going to do for me? How are you going to fix it? How are you going to keep me safe? Or, why aren't you giving me this? Why aren't you doing this for me? And some of that's good. There's a huge amount of opportunity in there. And some of it, I think, is a concern, or should be a concern from an HR perspective, in terms of people's ability to act independently, be creative and sort of be pointed in the right direction and do the things that we want them to do. And I think the third one, I'd also echo the mental health point that's been made. I think that's really important. We've seen a huge uptake in mental health, a willingness to talk about it, which is positive, I think. But the slightly different point I just wanted to share with you, which I was just reflecting on as Jackie and Dommy were talking. And it might play out in some of the audience today from a sort of academic background. We're science engineering. We've got a huge amount of extremely clever people working for us, PhDs left, right and centre. And that seems to be a notable uptick in people's willingness to challenge from a statistical or a data point of view. Just as a real example of that, we recently published our employee engagement survey, which actually, as most organisations do, was quite good, quite positive. And it really took me back that we actually got challenged by an awful lot of our employees about the basis for the survey, the statistical background to it. Was it really saying what it was saying, etc.? And I thought, why is this? And it might not be that we tie it directly to the pandemic, but I think the culture that's emerged of living in a world of data, as we did through lockdown, this is what the figures show, people questioning them now more and more, again, possibly playing through into people's attitudes to life, that, well, actually, I should be challenging, I should be quizzing. And in the sort of environment that I'm in, that's from a data point of view too. So maybe some different things there to see as well.
Yeah, and Chris, just following up, there's a kind of that common running theme there about maybe, the multi-generational workforces that we've got and probably, understanding the makeup of your workforce. So are you starting to see some different trends in your workforce, maybe over people's different perceptions and, what the expectations differ based on, the new graduates coming into the business versus perhaps those at a latter end of their career, where some of our key headings, like how we communicate financial well-being, can just be really different across those different generational.
Yeah, very, very much so. I mean, we have a significant graduate intake each year. We've just recently had about 90 started with us, as well as a huge number of apprentices, from 16 years old upwards. And it's very obvious their needs. I think, going back to the well-being theme, that population is the most vulnerable from a mental health perspective. So they do need a lot of support in that respect. And I think from a financial perspective, there is an appetite for it, actually. I mean, a lot's been written and said about the gaps in the sort of secondary education sector about financial education and the burden being passed to the employer. So there's a growing expectation for it, and certainly a need for it. And I think we're seeing that flow through in we call them early careers people, who just have a very different attitude to work, some of it based upon expectation, as we've all said.
Yeah. Brilliant, Chris. And Dommy, maybe we'll just lead on from that. And, Chris is touching on recruiting the new graduates into the workplaces and how critical they are. And I think we all have perhaps faced recruitment challenges in the last few years. We know turnover is incredibly high, and part of that is driven by this sort of customer satisfaction approach of, if people aren't happy at the moment, particularly if there's higher pay on offer in the current economic climate, then people will look at taking other opportunities and moving. How do you go about, Dommy, trying to solve the recruitment challenge by being able to retain the good individuals when they get their head turned? And have you got any great insights of what you've been utilizing in terms of retaining employees through these sort of challenging couple of years that we've had?
I think we are currently at a stage where our turnover is the highest since it's been, actually, since the pandemic, which we thought that we were expecting this to kind of like a year after going back to normality, but it's actually now. So we have a lot of challenges. The turnover, I think, percentage last week when I looked, it was at 32, which in retail is always relatively high, but it's very high. So we are looking at both retention, but attracting kind of the right people, not necessarily the best people in the I guess the world of work, but just the right people for us. I think in terms of our company culture has changed kind of 180 in terms of like what it was to what it is. We have a lot of people who knew what it was, and those are really the people that are the hardest to please, not the newbies. So I think attraction is definitely easier than retention. What we do is what we have found from our engagement survey is that people just want more transparency in terms of what's happening to the business and how the business is doing and what the plan is. For the next year or so, which we are trying to kind of, tackle. But, as you know, with some aspects, you can't be as transparent as probably, people in the business are expecting. And it's generally the younger generation who is kind of, like I said, expecting to kind of know all the ins and outs of what's happening, but it's not necessarily okay to share every single statistic from the business.
Yeah, good career pathways, Domi, I hear a lot of people talking about as being one of the best methods of retention. Is that something that you're looking to embed more, that, on day one, being able to identify a career pathway and a development pathway is a good way of keeping people in the business?
So I think we have a really good succession planning within the corporate space, not so much in the retail, because again in retail, and I don't know how it works exactly in education, but it's very standard. You kind of start at a retail consultant level and then go up to supervisor, etc., lead manager. It's kind of very straightforward. So, but it's not necessarily what people want to do. People want to specialize, and I think when I think just about our retail, there is obviously so much that you can specialize in. Your seller product is quite hard, but we are trying to be inventive in terms of projects that they can do or areas that they can work specifically on. I don't know, accessories, but yeah, anyway, I know that this probably doesn't give ideas to people in education, but I think it's not necessarily up, but maybe kind of to broaden thinking in terms of what you can do as like a sidestep or as an extra, or in terms of like challenging a particular skill.
That wider development piece, Dom, it's interesting. I heard from a company recently who actually were starting a colleague alumni as people left, sort of accepting that people will leave, but particularly where they're looking for a different experience, or the work environment becomes a little bit stale, but keeping in touch with them because they'll probably come back one day as well. And you go, wow, there's an interesting concept of how people are exiting, that we're trying to keep in touch with them because we might want them to come back. Jackie, talk to me about retention. How do we keep people in our workplaces when pressures are on pay and we can't always meet those expectations? Yeah. We've got to be a little bit more creative but what's going to truly keep people engaged.
I would resonate what Domi was just describing there, in terms of really connecting with your workforce and really trying to meet their expectations in relation to transparency. What we're trying to do is to try and combine ever greater comms with a deeper connection to the vision and strategy, and deeper connection to the client list, because the client list is ever moving, and it's very straightforward not to put that up in lights, but to really share some of those success stories of some of those client wins has helped to connect people to their involvement and contribution to the strategy, the business strategy. Yeah. And then closer to home, in respect of my area of work, there's never a bottomless pot of money for pay, is there? But to really squeeze maximum value out of your benefits package and to communicate that well, so people really understand all of the different pieces available to them. The more you offer, the more difficult that becomes, doesn't it? But we started a fortnightly communication effort as the pandemic started, and I did think initially we'd turn it off once the pandemic had ended, but it's just been so influential in making sure people understand what we've got and are using what we offer, that we've continued that. And sometimes people need that drip of the same message or similar messages to really grab those messages at a point in time that suits them, and then to do something with those. So that's been really, really helpful. But I think you do need quite a mixed group of different media you use to try and reach different audiences at different points.
Yeah, Jackie, we'll explore that communication piece, because I think often we can be victims, and particularly in education, of having wonderful actual benefit and total reward packages, but poorly communicated, that people don't always understand them, which is always really sad, that if you can actually reach out and explain them, people understand. So I'll come back to you on communication in a moment, but Chris, I'll just flip to you in terms of, recruitment and retention challenges of how you approach it. Any insights, Chris, into what you've done to try to just, make sure that we've got people retained in the business where we want them retained?
I'll do my best, and maybe some different angles again, perhaps. But I'll start by absolutely echoing what Jackie said about the importance of mission, values, purpose of your organisation. I think we're increasingly seeing the interest in that from a recruitment perspective, and equally to reinforce it for those that have been there a while and may be vulnerable to having their heads turned. And certainly, again, with the risk of stereotyping, certainly we're seeing with the new generation coming to the workplace how important that is to them to align their personal values with yours as an organisation. But that all said, we can't get away from pay. Absolutely, of course, we're all constrained with resources around pay, and it is not the answer to everything. But coming from a world where, as a reward professional, and I'm sure it's the same for fellow HR professionals on the call, we seem to spend a lot of our lives telling managers that the problem isn't pay, the problem's something else. I've had to sort of slightly change my perspective on that in the last couple of years with the cost of living crisis, because I think actually the problem sometimes can be pay, and that's because other organisations were offering significant sums to move people. At the peak of the so-called Great Resignation, when everybody was moving, there were some silly salaries being offered particularly for critical skills, people in shortage skill sectors. We have a lot of engineers. Some of the money being paid for engineers was ridiculous. So we can't necessarily compete with that, but even if it's not matching, you can perhaps make small gestures, which at least a signal that you are thinking about that and acknowledge that within the constraints you've got, you can do something about pay. I don't think that's sustainable. It's not the model we want to propose, but it's kind of a firefighting sort of tactic for the short term. Beyond that, I would agree with everything that's been said. It has to be much more holistic, alongside mission and values, all the good things about career pathways, development, learning, what people need, an understanding of what you can give them and what's in the deal for them. And I think the other piece that we found, again, it's very hard to tie it statistically to retention, but certainly in terms of recognition and value that people have seen, we've done quite a lot of work on family-friendly policies and family-friendly benefits recently. Where we can, some providers let you roll out benefits like discounts, platforms to family and friends, which is fabulous, no real extra cost. And sort of just from an engagement point of view, you can show that you value that whole family and the sacrifices people might make on that front to come and work for you. So I think that's proved quite beneficial, along with an increasing focus on the importance of retaining return to workers post-maternity leave, for example. That population have often been neglected. What can we do to make sure we keep the skills and experience there through flexible working policies, etc.? So some of that has definitely had an impact on recruitment and retention. It's hard to prove it statistically, but there's definitely something in that, in my view.
A really good tactic, Chris, though, as well, to think about how, the offering extends beyond just the employee as to what can we actually give to people that they care about, like, parents or children or wider networks. So looking at the benefits, and often, it's quite easy to say, well, things like health plans can be extended to cover a wider group, voluntary benefits and things like that. So a really good insight. Jackie, I'll just flip back to what you were saying about communication, and maybe we tie it into a little bit what Chris was saying, sort of about where the messaging comes from with managers and leaders and how important they are. But how do you ensure that, you know, the managers are effectively being a good voice in that communication piece when you're trying to promote that holistic offering, and also as a customer personalize it but what does that individual actually want and value, where you're often dependent on that manager relationship to be what interprets it?
Something I've done in the last couple of years has been to go into departmental meetings. And these departmental meetings, you know, might be scheduled once a week or once a month or whatever the frequency is. And the leaders of those meetings sometimes are challenged for what to put on the agenda to keep it fresh. And I try and use that opportunity to go in and present collectively to departments, and the numbers of questions that flow from those presentations, whether those be 20 minutes or 30 minutes or however much time I'm given. So I think that's been quite effective. Beyond what I'd anticipated initially. What we've also tried to do is to reach people in respect of how they feel about their pay. So payroll is always that too difficult subject, isn't it? So I've got a very friendly payroll lead, and I've asked him to come into those presentations with me, and he does an idiot's guide to understanding your pay slip, and that's gone down really well, really engaging people. And getting all of those difficult questions surfaced, or perceived difficult questions. I think ultimately we've, as I said a moment ago, we've tried to drip feed the messages, so people, if they've missed them the first time, have another opportunity to see those messages. And we've done similar to what Chris described, where we've tried to extend some of the offering out to family members and to really join the dots across, you know, the family experience for people where we can. We offer membership of the Calm app, which is quite a cheap benefit in practice. You know, £35 to buy on the retail market as an individual, but something like £16 for us to fund at a corporate level. But we've been able to offer that out to, you know, family members, whether that's sleep stories for little ones or, you know, meditation for your teenagers. That seems to have gone down really well.
Yeah.
So it's finding the small stuff and the big stuff and trying to join the dots across it, really.
Yeah. Do you think, Jackie, sometimes we're a victim of miscommunication, that we don't help ourselves? You know, there's certain terminologies that have been used for years, you know, things like the cash plan, things like the pension, which have a certain stigma attached to them. And if we think about things like a cash plan, just massively miscommunicated often, that there's so many services available through a cash plan offering, but people just see it as a different perception, and maybe they don't understand it. I don't know if there's anything that jumps out in your mind, Jackie, of, you know, something that is just massively miscommunicated that actually is a great offering often, but people just don't understand it unless you reach out to them.
I think pensions is the biggie and the classic, really, because there's so many compliance messages that your money can go down as well as up, that it's a real turn off for people, and they think their money's locked away forever. When actually they need to take charge of that, and pensions need to get sexy somehow, because that's where the majority of your money is to sustain you in retirement. So that is always a focus for me, trying to cut through that official language with pensions and try and bring it down into normal language where we can.
Yeah. Domi, I'll hand over to you in terms of communication, Domi, and that you know, trying to use managers as that connectivity to our customers, really, our colleagues. Any top tips in terms of how you've tried to communicate the offering out and just make sure that they are on message, Domi?
So I did what Jackie did, and I attended a few meetings with different departments. But what we also find really helpful is using case studies. So particularly with cash plan, because again, what we previously did, we just sent out the information, like, you know, 5 different PDFs, the table, please look at the table, where people don't really understand what some of the wording means. So we have, for people who actually have used cash plan in a certain way, we've asked to come forward and almost do a case study. So it would honestly just be a blurb of, I used cash plan for X, Y, and Z. This is what I did, and kind of we post those on the intranet, mainly on the intranet, and we always ask individuals to kind of share that with their teams as well, because I think people talk, and that's how they're going to find out, and it's real life example. So I think people find it a little bit more relatable. Pension for us, again, like it's quite tough because we have a relatively young workforce. I think the average age is 30, either 33 or 34, so it's very young, and people, even though they kind of know that it exists, they just don't find it sexy or interesting at the moment because they think they have, you know, so many years ahead of them. So we started communicating in just very bite-sized, like small kind of and we do posters around the office. And I know it's a very old school thing, but when you're making a coffee or when you go to the loo, you look around, and we actually found that those are helpful. So yeah, I think just real life examples and how people have actually used the benefits is really helpful.
Yeah, and it's Domi, there seems to be a theme, isn't there, that we often find that colleagues don't particularly like engaging with initiatives that sort of relate to that later life. You know, we often we struggle always with pensions engagement, and maybe, you know, the terminology of lifelong savings almost brings it back to being more relative. And we know with things like will writing services that we seem to have a human nature of not wanting to relate to things that are maybe, you know, things for later on in life. Or that perception of them that it's okay, that's not needed now. Is that something that you find that's actually some really good benefits we can help people with, but just the way that the people perceive them, they don't like dealing with them? Because, you know, life assurance, pensions, will writing, all important, we can help, but we as humans don't like talking about them.
And I think, you know, we go to work and work for so many hours, and then that kind of benefits become your life admin, and people just don't have time to just look into things, especially when you have, I don't know, you know, kids or you travel and commute, and so it's just finding the time to actually look at stuff. So we have actually stopped sending an employee handbook at onboarding in kind of the first days, because I think, again, that's when you receive so much information that you almost forget and put it to the side. So we send it now just before they pass probation, just because, again, we just find that people are more engaged at that time rather than like in the first few days meeting people and trying to get grasp of the new job.
The timing of communication, Dom, you're absolutely right. We hit everybody with it on day one before they've even realised, A, it's not their priority, and B, they don't really realise what they do want right now. It's not thinking about it. So that ongoing communication sounds like it's quite key as well. Chris, do you just want to add to that picture in terms of how we communicate, how we make sure managers represent that voice? And I think Domi touched on an interesting point there, which was really about, you know, that listening to our peers, that in this world of maybe being more of a customer, we actually trust what our other colleagues are saying, the same way as we would over a colleague recommending a shop or a restaurant. You know, if somebody else talks about it, we might follow.
Absolutely. I was just going to sort of to make that point, really reflecting upon the theme of treating the employee as a consumer, is when it comes to communications, where is the voice of the customer? So I think we've probably most organisations certainly have sort of some kind of a channel for hearing from your employees, and that should inform your communications, what's working, what's not, what do they need to know more of, what they need to know less of. And just one thing that we've found quite helpful in that respect is we've got a concept of local champions embedded throughout the business. So under different hats, we've got people who tend to be well-being champions or diversity champions or engagement champions, and that works both ways. You can use it to roll out messages, but equally they can hear from their work and feed back to you, and I found that really, really helpful in terms of understanding how communications are working or not, and again, just respecting that sort of customer voice, if you like. This is what I was looking for, this is what I'm hearing, what's the gap? The other thing I was just going to share, just sort of about communications, though, was at the risk of sounding like a sort of truly in my generation and harking back to a golden age of pre-digital, we do have a focus on so much on digital communications. And I'm beginning to wonder if there's still a space just for the difference that it makes for the good old-fashioned hard copy, such as the total reward statements that went through a phase years ago of landing on your doorstep on a Friday night, Saturday morning, where the whole family buy into it and see it and engage with what you're saying to your employees and what you have to offer. So I think comms, in terms of different channels, there's definitely an appetite for more variety of those.
Yeah, and Chris, just in terms of that double side to the conversation of actually being able to listen. How do you sort of get that employee voice heard? Engagement groups, focus groups, when you're shaping your offering, is it what the customer wants? How do you make that happen? Oh, might have just lost Chris there. Jackie, do you want to take that one of how we just make sure that we listen?
Yes, we have a two-pronged approach, really. We have employee committee structures and we seek feedback from those groups. I think that's really important. And we also have an engagement survey. So I've created specific reward and benefit questions within that. Historically, it was just only about pay, but to actually seek some input around well-being and benefits provision, I felt was important. So we've seen quite a lot of really good feedback coming through from both of those channels. Sometimes you can't give everything that everybody wants. That's the only thing. So it needs to be an honest, authentic conversation. But just to seek that input, I think is very, very valuable.
And just being clear on that as well, Jackie, that if you're going to go and collect the feedback, if you can't do it as a customer, we don't always mind the fact that something's not available as long as we know it's not available. So managing those expectations.
Yeah.
Dommy,
I would love to offer some fertility support, for example, but until my headcount is greater, private medical insurers won't enable me to do that.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. We seem to lose Chris. He's coming in and out.
Challenger, I think Chris is coming in and out. Dommy, I'm just going to flip over to you whilst we just see if Chris can rejoin us. But that old saying that the customer is always right, Dommy, is there a risk that kind of, at the moment, are employee expectations always realistic with what we offer in workplaces? Or does there have to be a line where we say, do you know what, we can offer some flexibility in many ways, but there's only so much that we can actually do? How do you manage expectations, Dommy?
I think for me personally, it just goes back to communication, so people actually understand the total package. And if you as a company are paying for private medical, do people know actually what does that cost? And I think also being quite transparent. It's okay to remove benefits and then change them, bring something else on board. Obviously, looking at engagement and how people are using certain benefits and taking kind of the data and then making a decision after that, or listening to your employees. But yeah, I think you really have to dig and before you make any decisions just out the blue, and just be as transparent. Again, you don't have to, I don't know, full transparency in terms of costing and how much the what the company decision is and the why, but some transparency so employees don't think, oh, we're just taking things away, or we've changed a provider without, people get very frustrated when we change the PMI provider, but they don't understand what happens in the background and why we've changed that. And we didn't want to put a higher excess, so we changed provider because we received better rates. So it's just, again, not oversharing, but to give them some indication in the comms, again, that are reasonable.
Fab, Dommy, and conscious of the time that we've got left, so I'm just going to, before we just go to any questions coming in, Jackie, just in terms of looking at what's coming in the future, I don't know whether you've just got a few bullet points of what do you think we're likely to see over the next couple of years in workplaces, and in the battle to attract and retain and motivate and engage. What trends are you expecting to see come through?
I think the caring sector is significantly under pressure, and of course, in a corporate context, childcare vouchers disappeared some years ago for new entrants.
Yeah.
But the corporate world hasn't really grappled with a proper care solution and I think there will be increasing expectation of help. I don't think employees will know how to articulate the type of help they want particularly, but they're going to be struggling ever more, I think, with childcare and elder care challenges. And I think the other area where we'll need to think about retention is during this period of change with the onset of AI, how we best navigate through that change and support people on a practical basis in terms of skills, but also emotionally as the world of work changes.
Yeah, great, Jackie, and I think by that support around childcare, etc. I think that keyword of flexibility, making everything as flexible as it can be, seems to be the big expectation that's being driven through. I'm going to go to Chris whilst he's with us. Chris, we're just talking about future trends. Hopefully you can hear me, Chris. No, Dommy, give me your predictions for the future, Dommy, and hopefully represent Chris's views at the same time as well. What do you think you're expecting to see come through from the employee voice in the next year or so?
Yeah, sure. I think mental health support is to stay. It's not going anywhere. So I think that's definitely a focus. But I think childcare and family support, and whether that's flexibility or whether you relook at how you support parents coming back to work, and whether those are dads or mums, I think we almost need to treat them as new starters, and things change over time when they are not in the business. So I think that support, and I think a little bit probably on financial well-being and how people navigate the cost of living, and just a general change. I think, again, as Chris mentioned, with the state and us being kind of a little bit responsible for the workforce, that'll probably be my number 3.
Yeah, I think things like earned wage access are where we can see a real add value. Once had a a bit of a nasty reputation for what it represented, but the concept of just allowing that flexibility in supporting people with those peaks and troughs in pay, I think is a good point. Let's just go for some rapid fire questions. I'm gonna just try Chris on this one. Chris, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Excellent.
IT gremlins at this end. I'm really sorry, everybody. Apologies.
That's absolutely fine, Chris. Chris, just in terms of the observation on employee dependency post-pandemic, as being the state of mind, Lucy was talking earlier about treating individuals as adults. So how do we overcome that employee? How do we encourage the employee to be an adult and take ownership for themselves while still trying to be that nurturing but supportive organisation? Where's the balance, Chris?
Yeah, a good question. Where is the balance? I think it depends upon your organisation and the culture that you aspire to. I think there are opportunities in the HR world and the reward world to prove to people the value of sort of independent thinking. So benefits choice is an old thing, but it's still very relevant. You're best placed to decide what you need at your stage of life. We'll offer you the choices, we'll offer you the education, we'll inform you, but it's your decision. And I think just reinforcing that can help sort of just get us back to a more of a sort of equitable sort of, I do live my own life and make my own decisions. I think also reinforcing it in the workplace. I mean, most jobs, other than the very basic manual jobs, require people to think, and we want people to think. We want them to be creative. So, and people, I think, want that from their work as well. Yeah. So I think sort of addressing it from a work front whilst showing the benefits of that kind of thinking in the employee benefits world should help.
Yeah, fantastic. Angela's just posted on about listening to what people want, and again, it links through to flexibility, but allowing people to sell leave, perhaps support that financial position, but also giving them the option. So I'll ask all of you just to round off that if there's one sort of employee benefit that forms part of the reward package, which is a bit of an unsung hero or something that can be a bit of a game changer, is the one thing that jumps out as, yeah, we often don't do this, and it would be a good thing to do. Jackie, I'll come to you. Is there anything where you go, wow, that's the one that you need to look into?
Holiday buy sell. I don't have at the moment. I'd love to, though. I think it's very powerful at retaining people. Yeah.
And it is that flexibility, Jackie, isn't it, around it? A bit like when we're talking about earned wage access. It's about putting the customer in control of, well, you determine how much holiday you want or need. You determine when you get paid. So yeah, it looks like that's a good one to progress. Dommy, from your perspective, is there something that is an unsung hero in the total reward package?
I think, again, this is free benefit that we offer, and maybe it's because we are in the retail space, but I think the swapping of bank holidays that we don't, and again, I work with 7 different countries, so it may be different, but with people's beliefs and how they want to work, it's just being able to swap bank holidays for any other dates.
Yeah, brilliant. And Chris, just with a quick head in, just for anything of yours.
It's not free, but I think one that has huge impact and bang for your buck now is wellbeing apps that give you access to things like virtual GPs, given the challenges with the work with the NHS and waiting lists, etc. Anything you can do to speed up health referrals, health information and wellbeing are landing really well, and I think are very powerful at the moment.
Brilliant. Thank you all for your time today and for your contribution. That's been an excellent session. Everybody, it's back to the main lobby now, and it's a lunch break till 1:20. Encourage everybody to come back at 1:20 for the AGM. Please ensure you're reaching out to the board members through the chat functionality. Make sure you're feeding back on the ECC service. And a big thank you to the panel members today. I can see lots of appreciation going on for your time. Chris, we need to sort out those IT gremlins, but thank you all.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And enjoy the rest of the conference, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.